Rain hammered against the tinted windows of the black Mercedes S-Class as it glided through the streets of Manhattan's Upper East Side. Inside, Richard Castellano sat rigid in the back seat, his salt and pepper hair perfectly combed, his Italian suit pristine despite the storm outside. At 52, Richard had everything a man could want: a real estate empire worth $300 million, a penthouse overlooking Central Park, and a reputation that commanded respect in every boardroom in New York City. But tonight, as his driver navigated through the downpour, Richard felt an unfamiliar weight in his chest. He just closed a deal that would demolish the Riverside Community Center, a building that had served the neighborhood's poorest families for 40 years. The board members had congratulated him. The investors had already wired their deposits. Yet something gnawed at him, something he couldn't quite name. "Mr. Castellano, there's heavy traffic ahead on Madison," his driver, James, announced. "Should I take the Park Avenue route?" "Whatever gets us home fastest," Richard muttered, scrolling through emails on his phone. "Before we continue with this incredible story, we'd love to know, where in the world are you watching from? Drop your city and country in the comments below. And if you enjoy stories that will keep you on the edge of your seat, hit that subscribe button right now. Trust me, you won't want to miss what happens next. New stories every week that will leave you speechless. The Mercedes turned onto a less traveled street, where the glow of streetlights barely penetrated the sheets of rain. Richard barely noticed when James suddenly braked. "Sir, there's someone on the sidewalk. Looks like they collapsed." Richard glanced up irritably. "James, we're not stopping for every homeless person in Manhattan. Drive around." "Sir, with respect, she's not moving. She might be hurt." Richard sighed heavily, his jaw tightening. "Fine, 2 minutes. Pull over." The moment James opened the door, rain invaded the car's warm interior. Richard stepped out, his $500 shoes immediately soaking through. Ahead, huddled against a closed storefront, was a figure in a tattered gray coat, sitting with knees drawn up, head bowed against the storm. As Richard approached, something stopped him cold. The woman, her face partially hidden by matted, rain-soaked hair, wore a necklace. Even in the dim light, even covered in grime and dirt, Richard recognized it instantly. A silver chain with a small pendant. A compass rose with a tiny diamond at its center. His heart began to pound. "Excuse me," he said, his voice barely audible over the rain. "Miss?" The woman didn't respond. Richard crouched down, and that's when he saw her face. Gaunt, weathered beyond her years, with hollow cheeks and eyes that seemed to have forgotten what hope looked like. But those eyes, even dimmed by hardship, he knew them. "Emma?" The name escaped his lips like a prayer. The woman's head lifted slowly. For a moment, recognition flickered across her face, followed immediately by something that looked like shame. She tried to pull her coat tighter, to hide the necklace, but it was too late. "Richard," she whispered, her voice hoarse and broken. He couldn't breathe. Emma Harrison, the woman he'd loved 25 years ago, the woman he'd promised to marry, the woman he'd abandoned when his father gave him an ultimatum: choose her or choose the family business. "What happened to you?" Richard asked, but the question felt cruel even as he spoke it. He could see what happened. Life had happened, the kind of life that grinds people down when they don't have money or power to shield themselves. Emma's lips trembled. "I kept it," she said, touching the necklace with fingers that shook from cold. "Even when I had nothing else, even when I could have sold it, I kept it because you gave it to me on the night you said you'd love me forever." The words struck Richard like physical blows. He remembered that night, 25 years old, standing on the Brooklyn Bridge at sunset, slipping that necklace around her neck and promising her the world. 3 weeks later, his father, the old tyrant who'd built Castellano Properties from nothing, had made his position clear. "That girl comes from nothing. She'll drag you down. Choose now, or you're out of the family. Out of the business, out of everything." Richard had chosen wrong. "Come on," he said abruptly, offering his hand. "Let's get you out of this rain." Emma recoiled. "I don't need your charity." "It's not charity, please." Something in his voice, perhaps the crack of genuine desperation, made Emma accept his hand. She was lighter than he expected, fragile, as if she might break. James had already opened the car door, his professional demeanor never wavering, even as he helped a homeless woman into a vehicle that cost more than most people's houses. Inside the Mercedes, the contrast was stark. Emma sat stiffly, trying not to touch anything, acutely aware of how she must smell, how she must look. Richard couldn't take his eyes off her. "Where have you been living?" he asked quietly. "Shelters, mostly. Sometimes the streets. It depends." "Family." Emma's laugh was bitter. "My parents died in a car accident 15 years ago. No siblings, no husband, no children, just me." "You never married?" She turned to look at him, and in her eyes was something that made Richard wish he'd never asked. After you, I tried. Once. He left when the money ran out. Turns out I'm only lovable when I'm profitable. Richard flinched. Emma, Don't, she interrupted. Don't apologize. Don't explain. I don't have the energy for it anymore. They drove in silence. Richard directed James to his penthouse, ignoring the driver's carefully neutral expression. When they arrived, the doorman's eyes widened at the sight of Emma, but Richard's sharp glare killed any comment before it could form. In the elevator, Emma stared at the polished brass walls. I shouldn't be here. Where else would you go? Back to the street? That's where I belong now. Stop it, Richard said, more forcefully than he intended. Just stop. The penthouse was exactly what Emma expected. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. Modern furniture that probably cost more than she'd made in her entire working life. Art on the walls that she recognized from museum catalogs. It was beautiful and cold and utterly lifeless. The guest room is down that hall, Richard said. There's a bathroom attached. Take as long as you need. I'll have James bring you some clothes. Emma nodded wordlessly and disappeared down the hallway. Richard stood in his living room, suddenly aware of how empty it was. How empty his entire life was. When Emma emerged an hour later, she looked different, clean, wearing one of Richard's old college sweatshirts and sweatpants, her hair still damp but combed. Without the layers of grime and rain, Richard could see the woman he'd once known, though time and hardship had carved deep lines into her face. I made coffee, Richard said, gesturing to the kitchen island where 2 mugs waited. They sat across from each other, the marble countertop a barrier between them. For a long moment, neither spoke. I need to know, Richard finally said. What happened? After we ended. Emma wrapped her hands around the mug. You want the whole sad story? I need to understand. She took a deep breath. After you left, I finished my degree. Got a job as a social worker. It didn't pay much, but I loved it. I was helping people, making a difference in small ways. Then I met Daniel. He was charming. Said all the right things. We got married too fast. I thought I could love again. She paused, sipping her coffee. He had debts I didn't know about. Gambling mostly. He drained our accounts, took loans in my name, and disappeared. I spent 5 years trying to pay it all back. Lost my job because I couldn't focus. Lost my apartment. Lost everything. The social services system I'd worked for couldn't help me because I'd fallen through every crack in it. Ironic, right? Richard felt sick. Why didn't you reach out? I would you? Emma's voice was sharp. Would you really? Or would you have told yourself that I made my choices, just like you made yours? He had no answer. She was right. I tried to find you once, Emma continued. About 10 years ago, I was desperate. I went to your company's headquarters. The security guard wouldn't even let me in the lobby. Said I looked like I was there to cause trouble. I didn't try again. Richard stood abruptly, unable to sit still. He walked to the windows, staring out at the glittering cityscape. Somewhere down there were thousands of people like Emma, invisible to people like him. I think about that night sometimes, Emma said softly. The bridge, the necklace. You promised me forever, and I believed you. Do you know what the worst part was? Not that you left, but that you never fought for us. Your father said jump, and you asked how high. He threatened to disown me. So? People build lives from nothing every day, but you couldn't imagine life without the money, without the name. So you chose, and I respected that choice. But don't pretend it wasn't a choice, Richard. Her words cut deeper than any business rival's insults ever had. Because she was right. He'd been a coward. He'd told himself he was being practical, being smart, but really, he'd just been afraid. I can help you now, Richard said, turning to face her. Let me make this right. I'll set you up with an apartment, a job, whatever you need. Emma laughed, but there was no humor in it. And then what? You feel better about yourself? You get to play savior and ease your guilty conscience? Would that be so wrong? Yes, Emma stood, her eyes blazing with an intensity that reminded Richard of the fierce, independent woman he'd fallen in love with. Because it doesn't change anything. It doesn't change that you abandoned me. It doesn't change that I spent 25 years surviving without you. It doesn't change that we're strangers now, and your money can't buy back lost time. Then what do you want from me? Richard demanded, frustration seeping into his voice. Nothing, Emma said quietly. I want nothing from you. I came in from the rain because you insisted. I'll leave in the morning, and you can go back to your empire and your deals and pretending that people like me don't exist. She turned to leave, but Richard caught her arm. Don't go, please. Emma looked at his hand on her arm, then at his face. Why? What difference does it make? Because I never stopped thinking about you, Richard said, the words tumbling out before he could stop them. Because every woman I ever dated I compared to you. Because I wake up in this penthouse alone every morning and wonder what my life would have been like if I'd chosen differently. Because seeing you tonight,
Wearing that necklace I gave you a lifetime ago made me realize that I've spent 25 years building a fortune and losing everything that actually mattered. Tears streamed down Emma's face. You don't get to do this. You don't get to make me feel things I buried decades ago. I'm not trying to manipulate you. I'm just telling you the truth. The truth? Emma laughed bitterly. You want truth? Here's truth. I hate you, Richard. I hate you for leaving. I hate you for making me love you in the first place. I hate you for giving me this stupid necklace that I've carried like an anchor around my neck for 25 years, reminding me every single day of what I lost. And most of all, I hate that even now, even after everything, some pathetic part of me still loves you. The silence that followed was deafening. They stood there, inches apart, two people whose lives had diverged so completely that they might as well be from different planets. Richard's phone buzzed. He ignored it. It buzzed again and again. You should get that, Emma said, wiping her eyes. It's probably important. Reluctantly, Richard pulled out his phone. 7 missed calls from his CFO, Marcus. He answered. Richard, thank God. We have a problem. A big problem. What is it? It's about the Riverside demolition. Someone leaked internal emails to the press. Our emails, Richard. The ones where we discussed forcing out the current tenants, bribing the city inspector. All of it. It's everywhere. CNN, Times, social media. We're being crucified. Richard's blood went cold. How bad? Career-ending bad. The Attorney General's office is already calling. This isn't just bad press. This is criminal investigation territory. Richard, we could lose everything. He hung up and stood frozen. Emma watched him, reading the shock on his face. What happened? My company. There's been a leak. Some emails that could destroy me. What kind of emails? Richard looked at her, and in that moment, he made a decision. He told her everything. About the Riverside deal, about the families who would be displaced, about the corners he'd cut, the rules he'd bent, the lives he'd dismissed as acceptable collateral damage in pursuit of profit. When he finished, Emma was quiet for a long moment. Do you remember the Riverside Community Center? She finally asked. That's the building we're demolishing. I know. I used to volunteer there. After Daniel left, after I lost everything, they gave me a place to belong. They fed me. They helped me find temporary jobs. They treated me like a human being when the rest of the world looked through me like I was glass. And now you're tearing it down to build luxury condos that people like me will never be able to afford. Richard felt the weight of her words crushing him. Emma, I didn't know. You didn't care to know, she corrected. That's worse. His phone buzzed again. More calls, more messages, all spelling out the same thing. His empire was crumbling, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. I need to make some calls, Richard said, his mind racing. I need to figure out how to contain this. Or, Emma said softly, you could let it burn. What? Let it all burn, Richard. Stop fighting to save something that's poison. Use whatever money you have left to actually help people instead of exploiting them. Or don't. Keep fighting, keep clawing, and end up exactly where I am. Alone with nothing but regrets and a piece of jewelry that reminds you of who you used to be before you sold your soul. Richard stared at her, this woman who'd lost everything and somehow retained more integrity in her worn-out body than he'd managed to keep in his entire privileged life. Over the next 3 days, Richard's world collapsed. The criminal investigation expanded. Investors pulled out. Business partners distanced themselves. His lawyers told him to prepare for the worst. Throughout it all, Emma stayed, not because Richard asked her to, but because, as she said, someone should witness this. Someone who knows what it's like to lose everything. On the 4th morning, Richard received a call from his lead attorney. Richard, I have news. It wasn't a hack. It was your CFO. Marcus? Why would he? The FBI flipped him, offered him immunity in exchange for cooperation. He's been documenting everything for months. Every shady deal, every bribe, every ethical violation. He was building a case against you from the inside. Richard hung up. Stunned. Marcus had been with him for 15 years. They'd built the company together, or so he thought. What is it? Emma asked, seeing his expression. Someone I trusted betrayed me. Emma's laugh was sad. Now you know how it feels. The words stung, but they were fair. Richard had betrayed Emma's trust all those years ago. Maybe this was karma. Maybe this was justice. I'm going to make a deal, Richard said suddenly. What kind of deal? With the prosecutors. I'll cooperate. Give them everything they need. Testify against everyone else involved. In exchange, maybe I avoid prison, maybe I don't. But either way, whatever money I have left, whatever assets they don't seize, I'm giving it away. Richard, I'm giving it to organizations that help people like you. Homeless shelters, job training programs, community centers, starting with Riverside.
I'm going to make sure that building never gets demolished. I'm going to fund it for the next 50 years. Emma searched his face. Why? Because you were right about all of it. I built an empire on the backs of people I never even saw. I convinced myself I was a success, but I was just a well-dressed thief. So now I'm going to try to be something else. It's too late to get back the life I should have lived, but maybe it's not too late to stop making the same mistakes. This won't fix what you did to me, Emma said quietly. I know. And it won't erase 25 years. I know, but it's a start. Over the following months, Richard's fall from grace became complete. He lost the company, lost the penthouse, lost the cars, and the reputation and everything that had defined him. He cooperated fully with the investigation, and while he managed to avoid prison, he was left with a fraction of his former wealth and a permanent stain on his name. Through it all, Emma stayed nearby, not as a romantic partner, not as someone who'd forgiven him, but as a witness, a reminder, a conscience. 1 year later, Richard sat in a small apartment in Brooklyn, the kind of place he would have sneered at in his previous life. It had 1 bedroom, a tiny kitchen, and windows that faced a brick wall. It was perfect. Emma had her own apartment now, 2 blocks away. Richard's final act before losing everything had been to establish a trust that would support her for life. She'd resisted at first, but he'd made it clear. This wasn't charity, and it wasn't redemption. It was just the bare minimum of what he owed her. They had coffee sometimes, once a week, at a diner halfway between their apartments. They talked about small things, books, weather, news. They never talked about the past. But one morning, Emma arrived wearing the necklace. She hadn't worn it since that first night in the rain. I thought it was time, she said simply. Richard understood. The necklace had been a symbol of broken promises, of pain, of everything that had gone wrong. But maybe, slowly, it could become something else. Not a happy ending. There would never be a happy ending to their story, but perhaps a different kind of closure. I've been offered a job, Emma said, at Riverside. They want me to run their social services program. That's wonderful. I said yes. I start next week. Emma, that's really wonderful. She smiled, and it reached her eyes for the first time in as long as Richard could remember. What about you? What are your plans? I'm volunteering, Richard said, at a job placement center in Queens, helping people write resumes, prepare for interviews. Turns out I'm actually pretty good at it when I'm not trying to exploit people. Emma laughed, a real laugh. Who would have thought? They sat in comfortable silence, drinking coffee that cost $2 instead of $8, in a diner with cracked vinyl seats, instead of a 5-star restaurant with white tablecloths. Do you ever wonder what would have happened? Emma asked. If you'd chosen differently that first time? Every day, Richard admitted. But I think I finally understand something. We can't change the past. We can only choose what to do with the present. I chose wrong 25 years ago. I chose wrong for 24 years after that. But maybe finally, I'm starting to choose right. Emma nodded slowly. I spent so long being angry at you, at life, at everything. But anger is exhausting. I think I'm ready to let it go. Not to forget, but to stop letting it control me. Does that mean you forgive me? She considered the question carefully. I don't know if I can forgive you completely. What you did, it shaped my whole life, and not in good ways. But I think I can accept that you were young and scared and made a terrible choice, and I can acknowledge that you're trying to be better now. Maybe that's enough. Richard felt something release in his chest. A tension he'd been carrying for so long he'd forgotten it was there. Thank you. They finished their coffee. Emma stood to leave, adjusting the necklace around her neck. Same time next week? Richard asked. Same time next week, Emma confirmed. As he watched her walk away, Richard thought about the man he'd been a year ago. That man wouldn't have recognized his life now. That man would have seen it as failure, as punishment, as loss. But Richard saw it differently. He'd lost everything, true, but he'd also found something he'd been missing for 25 years, a purpose beyond profit, a life beyond appearances, and a chance, however small, to become someone worth remembering for the right reasons. Outside, rain began to fall, but this time Richard didn't run from it. He stood on the sidewalk, letting it wash over him, remembering another night, another storm, and a woman in a tattered coat wearing a necklace that had survived everything life had thrown at it, just like she had, just like maybe he finally could too. Years from now, people might tell the story of Richard Castellano, the millionaire who lost everything and found something more valuable in the wreckage. But Richard knew the truth. This wasn't his story. It was Emma's. It had always been Emma's. He'd just been lucky enough finally to play a small part in it. The rain continued to fall as Richard turned and walked back to his apartment, his shoes squelching on the wet sidewalk, a small smile on his face. For the first time in 25 years, Richard Castellano felt like he was finally going home.